Welcome to the final day of the 2024 Widening the Pipeline Fellowship. Before we get started, I wanted to take one more opportunity to thank our sponsors, the Evelyn Y. Davis Foundation and Lenovo. On this last day, we're going to be wrapping up all of the stimulating, inspiring conversations that we've had with two people who will help us stay centered on this issue of the need to be authentic in whatever it is that we're doing. Catalina Camia is one of, I think, the most dynamic, forthright, plain-spoken yet powerful women that I've ever met in journalism. She is currently the deputy news editor for Bloomberg Law. Prior to that, she had a brief stint with the Freedom Forum, but the big noise in the room was when she was the editor of CQ Roll Call. You weren't the first woman editor, or were you the first woman editor?
I was not the first woman editor, but I was the first woman of color who was editor-in-chief and vice president of both CQ and Roll Call.
So when you think of some of the conversations we've had about what it takes to be a person of color, starting out in the business, putting together that toolkit, that advisory council, all of the elements that it needs to make an impact in this business, Catalina Camia embodies that. She, through her work with the Asian American Journalism Association, really sort of lifting others as she climbed, she has truly led the way in this industry in terms of authentic, impactful leadership. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Catalina Camia to you and to let her talk to you about why being authentic matters. Kat, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, fellows, for inviting me this morning. If you all will excuse me, what I'd like to do today is share with you some thoughts as you get ready to go back to your home newsrooms and to be the leaders that we know you already are and will be. I'm going to put this down for a second. Jeff, excuse the disruption in the video. And I am of a certain age where I need to put on my glasses and actually write some notes. I hope all of you were inspired last night by the journalism and journalists that the National Press Foundation honored, whether it was Al Roker or the great Dorothy Butler Gilliam or your editor of the year, Michelle Richardson. When Rachel asked me to speak, and she was way too kind in her introduction, calling me one of the top 5 speakers of the last session, I didn't hesitate because this program is special to me, not only as a journalist of color, but as a member of the board of the National Press Foundation. We strongly believe, as you've heard time and again while you've been here in DC, that the NPF believes that we can make good journalists better by giving you training and a foundation to which you can explore the truth and to tell the stories that matter in your communities. The way we do it, of course, is to not only ensure that there's a diverse group of speakers who come to you during trainings, but also to create programs like Widening the Pipeline. And when I was coming up in this business, and Rachel and I are not gonna do this, how old are we thing, but I was struck by how there were not many programs like this one to help people build that strong foundation. And to me, being in rooms like the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom, where you see 1,000 journalists and supporters who want good storytelling and authenticity in our newsrooms, it's really a powerful thing. Because I remember, as in my younger days, at the Dallas Morning News when I helped lead and found the Texas chapter of the Asian American Journalists. We met in my apartment in Dallas, which was half this room size, because there were so few of us. I'm proud to be part of a generation of AAJA members for whom the organization was actually founded. I was the first scholarship winner to become a leader of the national organization. And while I was president of AAJA a long time ago, I was very happy to have secured the seed money for a program that still exists today called JCamp, which is the high school journalists program that AAJA runs in advance of every national convention, where not just Asian American journalists get a chance to practice the craft, but AAJA has always strongly believed that anybody can apply to JCamp. I wanted to say a couple of things about all of you and the organizations that you represent. Some of you work in what we call legacy media, whether it's the Austin American Statesman or the Detroit Free Press, organizations that have been around for a long time and traditionally started as print journalism organizations. There are some of you who are in broadcast or digital media, and some, like Caroline here with Industry Dive, and I know there's somebody here with Inside Climate News, or my colleague Kayla from Bloomberg Government, who represent what we call in the business specialty media, for whom you produce journalism for an audience that specifically comes to you, whether it's for the topics that you cover or for the information that you provide. A bit about Bloomberg Industry Group and my job as Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Law. Bloomberg Industry Group is an affiliate of Bloomberg LP, the news and information organization that was founded by Mike Bloomberg, who was mayor of New York City. At Bloomberg Industry, we have 3 parts, and each of us present news and information for a group of professionals. At Bloomberg Law, I oversee 5 teams that write about the intersection of business, litigation, and regulation. And together, those 5 teams represent about 55 journalists, reporters, deputy editors, content editors, team leaders, and we make up about little less than half of the 120 or so Bloomberg Law journalists. Another part of our organization, Bloomberg Government, where Kayla is a team lead on the newsletters team. Bloomberg Government provides news and information for people here, mostly in Washington, D.C., but also across the country, who are interested in the way Congress and the federal government and government contractors and state governments work. And finally, the third leg of the Bloomberg Industry stool is our tax and accounting department, which again writes about all these really important, complex, nerdy things about the tax code for tax professionals and accountants. I joined Bloomberg Industry last summer as the company was in the middle of an expansion. And that is something that you don't hear very often in our business today. Our editor-in-chief, Cheska Antonelli, wanted to grow the newsroom so that we could compete and own every stage of litigation coverage, from the district courts to the Supreme Court, but also to have journalists who would also write about regulation as it was being developed here in the federal government. As Rachel said, I've had other senior editing and management roles, including my nearly 4 years as editor-in-chief of CQ and Roll Call, which are legacy media brands here in Washington, D.C. that cover Congress, the federal government, and all the ins and outs of what you might imagine that goes on up in Capitol Hill. I am a little bit intimidated to be closing up your time here in Washington, because you have heard from some of the smartest, most inspiring journalists that I know. Whether it's my friend Deb Berry from USA Today, who explored her own past and got a chance to go find out about her roots in Africa. My good friend Bobby Bowman, one of the leaders in this business to bring diversity into newsrooms, and the work that she and her colleagues did as the Washington Post Metro 7 to blaze a trail so that the Washington Post could reflect the community that it serves here in the nation's capital. And then my fellow board members from NPF, Sudeep Reddy and Terry Samuel, we all are now, what you've heard all this week, we're now your people. We're part of your network. And we want you to draw on our experiences, to reach out to us when you feel as though you need a little something extra in your newsrooms. My information is available on my LinkedIn profile. Just please, when you reach out, or if you reach out through the NPF, just remind me that you're in the Widening the Pipeline program, and I will make the time. It may not be right away, but I'll make the time to get back to you. Today, I still follow on social media a couple of the last cohort of fellows, and I'm just thrilled with how they're doing and the way that they're transforming their newsrooms. At the outset, I want to say something about what I still feel today, decades into my career. And I felt it a little bit last night as I heard the powerful words of Monica Richardson telling her story of what it was like for her as a child to express that she wanted to be a journalist. I had a similar journey. I am the first person in my family to graduate college. I am the granddaughter of Filipinos who fought for freedom on behalf of the United States and who were captured by the Japanese during the Battle of Bataan. And my grandfathers were able to bring their families to the United States in large part because of their service as both U.S. Army and Philippine Scouts. Last night, once again, I felt a little bit like I didn't belong, and that those pangs of imposter syndrome will hit you every now and then. And yes, last night, once again, it hit me as I looked around the room and I thought, do I really belong here? And let me just say to all of you, when you were introduced by Rachel and asked to stand at my table, one of my fellow board members leaned across his seat and said to one of our guests, a non-journalist, you know, Kat and I are one day going to work for all of them. And that is true. So if there is one message I want all of you to take back home, is you belong in every room that you're in. Regardless of your race, your sexual orientation, your ethnicity, your background, your circumstances, you belong. And we, in this, who are at a certain stage of our careers, we see you as the hope and the future of what will sustain truth in journalism and this news industry. I know that as all of you traveled here, you were seeing the same headlines about layoffs and closures. And I'm not going to lie, it is a very tough time in our business. But Rachel and I and your other speakers, we've seen tough times before, and we always bounce back. I'm really impressed by what I call a wave of entrepreneurial journalism, of people who say, you know what, legacy media is not for me anymore. The business model doesn't work. And that's where we get organizations like Capital B or the 19th News, or where we get people who want to support news in their community and fund local news alternatives and nonprofit news like the Texas Tribune or an affiliate that I hope all of you get to know, States Newsroom, which has launched up organizations in state capitals across the country. Each of us as journalists believe that as we move on, that we need to bring, and as we do our jobs, we need to bring truth to power. And one way we do that is reaching down deep inside and being our authentic selves. There were times, I think, rising in this business when I've seen or heard colleagues who were asked to chicken at the door, that what you did at AAJA or NABJ was something else, that you left that behind when you were in pursuit of stories about government or politics or education. But the truth is, you can't be honest with your audience unless you are honest about your authenticity. Authenticity could include your race, your ethnicity, your gender identity, your ability, your physical ability. But it's also about your faith, your heritage, your style, the way you conduct yourself, and so much more. Last summer at the AAJA convention, which happened to be held here in Washington, D.C., I had a fangirl moment. And I met Michelle Lee, an anchor woman with a TV station in St. Louis. Michelle is the founder of an organization called the Very Asian Foundation. And I remember when her story became national news, and I started to follow her on social media. And I watched what she did when she transformed what could have been a low moment in her career into something very, very positive. Michelle, who is Korean American, drew national headlines in 2022 when she shared a voicemail on air that she received from a viewer who watched her story on New Year's Day about the foods that people eat from their traditions and heritage to celebrate New Year's. And she had mentioned that one of the things that she does is she eats dumpling soup. Well, a viewer, a woman, a white woman, left her a voicemail. And the woman complained that Michelle was, quote, being very Asian, end quote, on air. And went on to say that her comment about eating dumpling soup was inappropriate and, quote, annoying. And that she should, quote, keep her Korean to herself. Now, Michelle Lee could have done a lot of things, including going off on this woman. She posted the voicemail on her social media with the hashtag very Asian. And the response that she got was incredible. This was 2022, after the racial awakening of the murder of George Floyd, after the violence against people who happened to be Asian Pacific Islanders. And Michelle channeled her energy into something very, very positive. She got a lot of attention for the voicemail. She got invited to appear on the Ellen DeGeneres show to talk about her experience as a Korean American journalist working in communities where, you know, sometimes a lot of the people on the air didn't look like her, and sometimes a lot of the people in the community didn't share her past and experiences. Today, the Very Asian Foundation tries to improve the lives of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and they help build libraries, they consult with community groups, and they spotlight very important AAPI issues. In an authentic workplace, journalists like Michelle feel very comfortable being their true selves. And so when I met her at AAJA, she probably thought I was this crazy old woman, right? You know, a has-been. And I had almost tears in my eyes as she recounted again for her what it was like to be subject to a reaction like that. Another story about authenticity in the newsroom. I have not met this journalist that I'm about to talk to, but I've read a lot about her. And I suspect that if I ever get a chance to meet her, I'll have that same fangirl moment. In 2021, history was made in the state of Connecticut when Ayat Galal anchored a Saturday morning newscast while wearing hijab. She is believed to be one of fewer than about a dozen on-air reporters who wears hijab and who embodies their Muslim faith in that way. In an interview last year, Ayat told a Connecticut news outlet that her choice wasn't just about wearing the scarf. She said, and I quote, "It's also how you act as a Muslim. Being fair, being just, being kind in your words, and being a good person. There's much more to it," she said, "and this is an important part of my faith." And the last story I want to share about authenticity is about someone I know who described himself once as a word nerd. He is a former high-ranking editor at the Los Angeles Times named Henry Furman. And all of us in this room, and every journalist of color, every person of color in this nation, owes a debt of gratitude to Henry Furman. Henry got his start as a copy editor at the Los Angeles Times. And he, through his 25-year rise at the LA Times, moved into positions of leadership and helped other journalists of color in what was then a Times training program called MetPro. In his retirement, he taught at the University of Southern California, but he also quietly, actively lobbied for precision in words with the Associated Press. And he pushed the AP to drop the hyphenation in descriptions like Asian American and African American. Henry, who is of Japanese descent, wrote in 2018 that, quote, "Those hyphens serve to divide even as they are meant to connect. Their use in racial and ethnic identities can connote an otherness, a sense that people of color are somehow not full citizens or fully American." The AP, whose style book is the Bible of our industry, agreed. And they updated the style book a couple years ago to remove the hyphen from such descriptions. And because of that, many of our news organizations also do the same. Unfortunately, we lost Henry in 2022 after a sudden illness. And it was a year that I did not attend the AAJA conference, which was held in LA. But many of my friends said that they saw Henry, much as he always was at every convention, year in and year out, sharing his wisdom and thoughts and mentorship with a younger generation. I tell these stories because I believe strongly in something that a mentor and a giant in our industry once said to a group very much like this. John C. Quinn was a founding editor of USA Today, and I worked at the organization years after he had retired. But in that interim, he helped found a internship program for journalists of color in which the Chips Quinn Scholars Program would give college students a scholarship, but also place them in an internship across the country. And Mr. Quinn, who I never called him John even after I volunteered for the program for many years, would always say to every Chips Quinn class and to every group of journalists of color that he spoke to, you have an obligation to lift up the next person and to bring them over the wall. And that's why, in all honesty, for decades and for years, I do give back in small ways, whether it's in service as a board member of the National Press Foundation, or just by taking the time in my own newsroom or in previous newsrooms to answer questions, to listen, and to actively help just in small ways journalists such as yourselves. Now, I've been talking a lot, and Rachel and I wanted to have a dialogue, and I always like to leave every group with some practical tips. And so, when you go back into your newsrooms after this in-person training, please keep the following things in mind as journalists of color and also as leaders. First, leadership isn't title. It doesn't have to be management. Just because I was fortunate once to have my name at the top of the masthead, being editor-in-chief and vice president of a news organization didn't make me a leader. Many of you may someday want to go into management, and we'll have a talk about what it's like to lead groups of people and to manage budgets and to manage the expectations of your audience. But you all can and are leaders from wherever you sit and from whatever job you hold in this business. Remember too that you weren't hired as a journalist in your organization to represent everyone who looks like you or who is the same race or ethnicity or has the same background. You are you, and your voice matters. Again, don't check your authenticity at the door or ask someone else to do so. Be your genuine self, especially when it's hard to do so. If you do get into a position to hire or recruit others in your newsroom, look broadly for those people who can add some form of diversity and to bring inclusion in your workplace. Again, you don't want to hire a bunch of people who are just like you. And finally, diversity in newsrooms and in the news that we cover can only be achieved if we make room at the table for everyone, no matter their background, their race, their color, their ethnicity, their style, their gender. That is how we all be authentic and pave a sustainable path future for this business. Thank you all. In the words of my ancestors in the Philippines, my Tagalog is very bad, but maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.
I'll let you get a sip, because I think this is an important point for me to be able to remind us of something that we talked about prior to going to the dinner last night, when I said, don't let shyness or fear keep you from approaching people because they're just like us. Before I met Catalina Camia, because of everything I'd heard about her, and at the time she's at CQ Roll Call, she's a big deal, I was intimidated. I expected,
please.
I expected her to be, hello, I'm Camia, and to really just put off the big boss energy and would make me freak out. So with people like Boris Sanchez yesterday, who is on TV every night and who's interviewing famous people, and he's, poised and whatever. Monica Richardson, who is beyond a legend. And before I met her, I had all these images in my head of what she would be like. Authenticity. Each one of those people are authentic. They're comfortable in their skin. They know what they know. As Deli Reese used to say, you got to know that you know what you know. And that's what each of these people are. That's my wish for each of you, no matter what you do. Hopefully I want you all to stay in journalism, but if you don't and go off and make real money, I want you to feel comfortable being who you are, being authentic, being genuine, being accessible. That doesn't mean you put up with a lot of nonsense. It doesn't mean you let people walk. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means standing squarely in your energy and allowing things, as Michael Bolden demonstrated for us, allowing our expertise to bring the opportunities to us. Not out there hustling and pushing. I got to stab somebody else in the back to get what I want, right. Or I got to play the right game or do whatever. Michael lived his life, sought his opportunities, did what he wanted to do, and the knocks on the door kept coming. So I think I want to open it up, because I know I could hog all the time in terms of asking questions, but does anybody have any questions for Kat? Let's start up here with Fernanda.
Yes.
Wait for the mic.
My grandma's name is Catalina and my mom's middle name is Catalina. she was gonna name me Catalina, but then she's like, no, Fernanda. But my but my question is, because you were talking about at the end of like that we weren't hired in the newsroom to be the voice for everyone. For me, one of the struggles that I have is like when a Hispanic Heritage Month comes, I'm one of the very few Hispanics in the newsroom, and I want to do something to tell the stories, but I also don't want to be like the one person who's doing it, because our previous reporter was that one person, and I just kind of never helped because I was like, I don't want to be like, oh, you have to tell those stories. So kind of, how do you balance trying to do that?
Well, a couple ways. One is there's always strength in numbers, right? And I have been in newsrooms where there weren't a lot of people of color, and yes, editors will say, Fernanda, hey, you're Latina, can you cover this? Couple of strategies. You can say no, but offer an alternative. Whether it's, this thing that you want me to cover, it's not really what I experience as a Latina. Maybe we should do a story about the family network, or Latinos and Latinas who are finding their identity, and how the challenges of being both a person of color and family expectations may collide. The other way that you can be your authentic self is to help others. Hey, and I happen to know some of your editors, okay? Maybe the thing to do is for me to help, and I'm just going to say John or Anna, in their stories about education or their stories about government. If you speak another language and they don't, that is helpful to them. I have had situations in newsrooms where assignments have been made and stories have been discussed where we're very, very careful not to say Fernanda should do this story because she's Latina, okay? And but sometimes journalists of color want to tell the stories, and I'll tell you another a story from my recent past where a journalist that I worked with at CQ Roll Call, who normally who normally collects election and voting data. It was at the height of the anti-Asian violence that was sweeping the country, and he wanted to go out and talk to the AAPI Capitol Hill staffers who were working for Asian Pacific Islander members of Congress, to talk to them about the challenges that they had as they watched their bosses frantically try to put together some sort of legislative package to address the situation. And I remember hearing about this journalist's story idea, and I swear I did nothing other than to say to the group of editors, that's a good story. Let's go with it. Several weeks later, Paul's story appeared, and it was this wonderful, deeply reported, rich, nuanced story about what it was like for these staffers, many of whom were invisible to the rest of the Capitol Hill community because of who they were. And I'll never forget the lead anecdote which was about a staffer who worked on the Hill 4 years and one day brought leftovers to microwave in the office, and it was a Korean dish, okay? And someone said to this staffer, you know, that smells. Ooh, what is that? And she sheepishly never brought those leftovers to work again. But when Paul's story came out, he got such a wide response from not just Asian Pacific Islanders, but Black staffers and Latino staffers about, again, just taking the time to tell a story that hadn't been told. But I also want to salute your editor-in-chief, Manny Garcia, who was editor of the year last year. What he did, his leadership after the tragedy in Uvalde, of taking the police report, translating it in Spanish, and as Manny told the NPF dinner audience last year, personally driving those copies up to Uvalde so that the community could see the report. That's true leadership.
Pass it over to.
Hi, Brandon.
Hello, I'm with Capital B News. Thank you for talking with us today. My question is, how do you navigate like potentially sensitive conversations around sort of identity in a way that you don't like, you navigate them with sort of like an open mind and open sort of like generosity without sort of like shutting down? My editor always jokes with me. She's like, Brandon, you're always ready to fight. I'm not. But,
Yeah.
you know, how
Yeah.
do you sort of...
I get that too, buddy.
Yeah. Like, how do you sort of, I guess, give people the benefit of the doubt to like have like real sort of like dialogue as opposed to like reading 3 steps ahead and it's just like, I've seen this movie before and I know what you're trying to say, like sort of thing.
I think the first thing to do is to slow down and to be honest with the person that you're trying to have dialogue with, and to show that you want to actively listen and to listen empathetically. Be candid, be honest. I want to learn. I don't want to judge, but can you help me understand? Again, a story. I went through this myself as editor-in-chief of CQ Roll Call when I think it was the summer of 2021. A journalist who used to work at the organization reached out and let us know, and actually let their social media followers know, that they had transitioned during the pandemic. And the ask of me was, could we change their byline on stories so that the clips that were on the public-facing part of the roll call website would have their new name? And I like to think that, you know, I'm open and inclusive. And I said to this journalist, congratulations. I know your journey may have been tough, and I'm glad you're happy now, and you have embraced your identity. But I said, and I was very open about it, I got to think about how to do this logistically. I wasn't opposed to the idea of changing their byline, but as you all know, content management systems have a mind of their own, and we had 2 content management systems, one for behind the paywall and one for in front of the paywall, that I just didn't know how to do this. But I also did what any journalist would do, but what I do a lot when faced with a tough decision was I started to report. I reached out to journalism experts. I reached out to the Poynter Institute to talk to diversity and ethics experts about, okay, am I really thinking through what this means? I talked to a friend whose own child had transitioned, and I sought the guidance of the Trans Journalists Association of what to do. But we finally changed their byline after a friend of mine on the IT side of the business said, hey, did you know that this person in our department went through the same thing about 10 years ago? And I reached out to Diane and talked about their journey. And she was quite pleased that I sought her advice. And it turned out she was the one person at the company who knew how to tweak the CMS. So we quietly did it, and I was glad that I slowed down, approached it from a position of wanting to understand and to learn. And I think, Brandon, a lot of times people say the same thing to me. You're very, forceful and quick. And sometimes being the opposite is the best thing to do.
I think she's echoing several comments over the past few days of speakers who've said, make sure you've got the information. Make sure you walk into conversations armed and ready. Let's go to Michael and then Brianna.
Hi, I'm Michael with the Salt Lake Tribune. I have a really quick comment and then an actual question. I just wanted to first express gratitude. I mean, as a member of AJ, the organization has done a lot for me, and so it's great to hear from early leader of the organization, and obviously someone who's still very, very involved. But in terms of my question, you talked a lot about kind of, leadership starts now, right? And it starts with us. And I have been thinking about this for a while, and that's the concept of, how to encourage your editor or executive editors in the hiring process of other employees to maybe be like, hey, can we hire some more people of color in the newsroom? Just because I feel like as a reporter, sometimes I feel like, I don't have that power. I'm not part of the hiring process. I'll, do my due diligence, post the job link in various affinity groups or Slacks, right? But that's, for me, I feel like that's all I can do. And so I'm curious, especially as someone in management position, your advice on, how a reporter should navigate something like that.
A couple thoughts is, again, use your network, right? I'm sure that you might be able to find allies in your newsroom, whether it's other reporters or editors outside of the hiring process, and make the business case, okay? And offer suggestions and alternatives. You're doing what I think is smart by sharing job links, but don't think that just because you're not part of the hiring process that you don't have influence. I remember a couple of reporters came to me when they saw one of our job advertisements for an opening, and they pointed out that some of the phrasing may turn off certain applicants. And I talked to the HR department because we had, kind of a cut and paste template on job descriptions. And I said, look, what I'm hearing is when we say hardworking or aggressive, that we could be turning people off. One thing on jobs that I often say now, particularly for journalism jobs, some news organizations have stopped saying that a bachelor's degree is required because, as we all know, in this business, you practice the craft, okay? And I know of several journalists who, yes, attended college, but never graduated. And there's a very famous Pulitzer Prize winning African American former editor-in-chief of the New York Times, who I believe never graduated from college, but yet he rose to the top ranks. So that's a strategy.
Brianna?
So I have a authenticity question about reporting. So I'm working on a story with a colleague of mine, and we're talking to a lot of Palestinians right now about like why their family immigrated and like the community they were looking for and the community they found is basically the premise of the story. But during it, I'm very inclined talking about like my personal experience as a black woman. I've done that. And my colleague, who's Syrian, has never talked about himself in an interview, but he was like, I heard you do that. So he started talking about growing up with Al Jazeera and all these things. And he's like, did you feel that too? And it kind of has felt like therapy talking to people for him. And he asked me about it, and he was like, is it okay to do that? And I said, of course it's okay to be yourself, but I'm not sure. Like, it's just something I've always done. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts about it, because
yes,
it's
okay.
really, really personal things sharing. Like, you know, my parents did this to me. Did that happen to you? And yeah, I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
Yes, it's very much okay, because what you're doing is making a connection. You're helping people whom you interview understand where you're coming from when you're asking questions. And your colleague who's Syrian, who may not be as open about it in their work, being able to talk about their experience with you is actually helping them as well be a better journalist. I've been struck by journalism and storytelling in the last few years that really is much more personal than I think Rachel and I saw coming up in this business. And I salute it. There are times when it's very much appropriate to bring into the story that you're telling.
Any other? We'll pass it back to.
Hi, I'm Bianca from Politico.
Oh, Bianca.
Hi.
I know your story.
Oh.
The fires in
Yeah,
Chico?
yeah,
Oh
in
my God.
That's me.
Tell the story. Okay. Hey, sorry to interrupt. I have read about you.
Oh, wow.
You are one of my sheroes.
Thank you. Wow. I'm gonna cry. So like the standalone story or the campfire itself?
The campfires.
Yeah, so the campfire broke out and I was still full-time in school, taking like 21 units at that time, and also working full-time at the newspaper, which was like only 14 people. And so we had this like struggle of figuring out how do you deliver news to a town that no longer exists, while also, you know, being really spread thin. And so one of the stories I ended up writing was about a girl who could not convince her mother to evacuate with her. And she ultimately had to make the choice of, do I leave my mother behind and go myself, or do I try to take her with me? And she left her mother behind. And an hour later, she found out that her mother died. But, you know, she didn't know this until several weeks later. So I had found her, like, at a shelter while she was still searching for her mother. And, you know, according to, like, the call logs and all that sort of stuff, literally within an hour, the fire had just taken her mom's life. So, but yeah, so it was a really rough time. We worked, like, hours on hours on hours, while also, you know, I was in finals at the same time. So, But it was one of the toughest things, and one of the most important things I've been able to do in my life, I think. So, but anyways, thank you. I wanted to ask you about imposter syndrome. Like that feeling that people say that they get when you're doing like public speaking, where like all of a sudden you feel like you're gonna shut down. I feel that way every time I'm in the Capitol and I have to approach a lawmaker, or I am in the White House or the Education Department. And I'm wondering, what are ways that you get through it? Or what do you tell yourself in those moments so you can do your job, even though you feel like you don't belong there?
Okay. I still get that way. It's been a while since I've been an editor for quite some time. So I spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring reporters such as yourselves about how to approach stories. And one of the things that I always remember that was taught to me is every politician, whether it's the president, member of Congress, they are human beings. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do, okay? They have families. They have backgrounds. They're people. I am not physically tall, okay? And the Capitol today has even more reporters than I remembered from my time. And so I had a strategy about just sort of wading through crowds. People never knew who hit them in the back because it was me, okay? Because I needed to get up front to hear what was being said. But I tried always to never let someone's title, station, job be intimidating. I became a journalist in large part because holding that notebook, holding the microphone, and asking someone a question allowed me to see a world that I didn't think I was going to see. And you learn after a while that your shyness, your intimidation, your hesitancy, it'll go away time after time, with time. Although, again, another story, I will say I didn't know what I was doing when I met Jimmy Smits, okay? Jimmy Smits, the actor, some of you may not know some of his best work, like LA Law. Jimmy Smits was walking through the lobby of a hotel where AAJA was meeting. And I think I had just been named president of the organization. And I saw a small group of AAJA members talking to this really tall, good-looking guy. And I realized, wow, that's Jimmy Smits, right? And he was with a colleague who ran a foundation that he was involved in, okay? And I'm just like not thinking, okay? I'm tired, it's late, and people are motioning me to come over, and I just think it's somebody who could possibly help the organization because people were talking to him, and I thought, oh, it's a donor, right? Okay, I'm not kidding you. I've never told this story publicly. So I walk across the hallway, I stick out my hand and I say, hi, I'm Catalina Camia. I'm president-elect of the Asian American Journalists Association. And I look up and my jaw dropped, okay? And I'm like, man, you are Jimmy Smits, okay? And the spiel came out of my mouth, okay? Hi, we have an organization that promotes diversity, and we'd love for you to come talk to us or whatnot. He did the business thing where he turned to his person. His person gave me their card, and of course I tried for months after that to see if Jimmy Smits would come talk to AHA. But it was one of these wild moments where I'm like, did I really just do that? And yeah, I did. So anyway.
Something I live by: feel the fear and do it anyway. I acknowledge when I'm nervous and scared, but I'm determined that I'm going to do it anyway. Last question, and then we'll.
So I'm going to address a point you touched on, which was layoffs, especially in the
I'm
latest.
sorry, what's your name?
I'm Aditi. I work for CNN.
Hi.
Hi. There was a lot of layoffs, and journalists of color in particular were really hit. Since you work for Bloomberg Industry, and I've previously worked for an industry publication called Digiday, I came off that experience thinking that trade publications and industry publications are the safe spaces in terms of their businesses and finances and how they plan for livelihoods of journalists. Can you talk a little bit about that, just in terms of like, am I right? Is that our safe spot? Like, should we, think more about business models like that, etc.?
Let me answer your question by addressing the last point that you made about business models. I think I said at some point in this talk that this is a rough time, and Rachel and I have seen rough times in this business before. But I have been impressed again with this spirit of entrepreneurship. And yes, subscription publications that understand their market and their audience, and that have business models where they can retain and actually grow an audience, are places that I did not know existed before I moved to Washington. I'm going to try very, very hard not to actually declare one business model over another as safe. But as you all progress in your career and look around and look at other news organizations or any organization you want to change, you want to join, is ask those questions. I am not, I tend to be risk averse, so I am not the right person to be in a startup, okay? But some of you may be. And so the questions to ask: where's your financing coming from? How long will it last? Who are the donors? What are the metrics they are looking for to get a return on their investment? Those are, in that point in a job interview when someone says to you, do you have any questions for us? That's the time to bring that up. And I have been surprised over the last 10 years at how, at the times when I do get those questions, particularly when I've worked at specialty media, because they're legitimate ones to ask. And seriously, it was not something I would have asked when I applied to the Dallas Morning News or to USA Today, because that wasn't in my frame of mind when I was looking for new jobs. But it's definitely questions to ask. I will say, I read a statistic a couple of years ago about applications for credentials to cover the Congress here in Washington, and the biggest growth area was applications from specialty media. And the definition of specialty media in this report that I read was very, very wide. Politico was considered specialty media. Inside Climate News, specialty media. There's a whole host of newsletter publishers here in Washington that are thriving because of subscription models. One organization that I didn't know much about until I moved to Washington, D.C., it's an organization called Education Week that, and they have a business model built on subscriptions that really is very, very smart. And so now when I'm asked, hey, where should I look for a job? I often will say to people, don't forget, it's wrong to call these places trade publications, okay? That's the common, but I call them subscription-based, audience-focused news organizations.
I hope you have taken from this discussion with Kat Camia the need to remember that authenticity can be power. She is a powerful yet accessible leader in this industry, and we are so grateful to you for having spent this morning inspiring us. So let's take this opportunity to show Kat our appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you.